A millionaire, engrossed in his business affairs, blindly trusts his wife to care for his frail elderly father, unaware of the malice lurking beneath her facade of perfection. The Albuquerque mansion was a monument to wealth and good taste, with its halls adorned with works of art and gardens that stretched like an emerald green carpet. But behind the marble and glass facade, a shadow of malice began to spread. Elara, Gustavo Albuquerque's wife, moved through these opulent rooms with the grace of a ballerina and the calculating coldness of a strategist. To the world, and especially to Gustavo, she was the perfect daughter-in-law, the embodiment of dedication and affection. That morning, the sun filtered through the silk curtains of Mr. Ricardo's bedroom. The family patriarch, the old man in his early 80s, was frailer each day, his memory failing like an old engine. Elara entered the room with a breakfast tray, a sweet smile on her lips. "Good morning, my dear father-in-law," she said, her voice soft as velvet. "Did you sleep well?" Mr. Ricardo blinked, trying to focus. "Elara? Oh, yes. Good morning, my dear. You're always so thoughtful." She placed the tray on the bedside table, adjusting the pillows so he could sit up comfortably. "It's the least I can do for you, Mr. Ricardo. Gustavo would be furious if I didn't take good care of his father." The mention of Gustavo was always a tactic, a subtle reminder of her position and her loyalty. As he took a sip of tea, Elara picked up the weekly pill organizer, which she herself organized with meticulous precision. "Now, your medication so you can stay strong and healthy." Her slender, elegant fingers opened the day's compartment. There were 3 pills. One for his blood pressure, another for his heart, and a vitamin supplement, with an almost imperceptible movement, one she had rehearsed countless times. Elara palmed the heart pill, while the other 2 were placed in the glass of water. "Here you are, Mr. Ricardo," she said, extending the glass. "Take them all, properly." The old man swallowed the pills without question, trust shining in his watery eyes. Elara smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, as the stolen pill disappeared into her pocket. Later, in the living room, Gustavo was reading the financial newspaper, engrossed in charts and figures. The family parrot, Loro, perched in his gilded cage, watched the activity with his curious bright eyes. Loro was a constant presence in the mansion, a silent observer of all interactions. Elara descended the stairs, impeccable in a silk dress. "Gustavo, my love, father is doing so well today. He ate all his breakfast and took his medication. I'm so happy to see him with more energy." Gustavo lowered his newspaper, a proud smile on his face. "I knew I could trust you, Elara. You're an angel. My father has never been so well cared for. With my schedule, I don't know what I'd do without you." She sat beside him, taking his hand. "It's my duty, my dear, and my pleasure. Family is everything." For a brief moment, Elara's eyes darted to Loro's cage. The bird, as if sensing her gaze, tilted his head, letting out a sharp chirp. Elara felt a shiver, a pang of discomfort. But she quickly composed herself, turning her attention back to Gustavo, who was already back to his business, blinded by the trust and the facade of perfection she had so skillfully built. The pill in Elara's pocket seemed to weigh more than it should, a small secret that for now was safe. But Loro, with his peculiar intelligence, was already beginning to absorb the sounds and voices echoing through the mansion's corridors, storing them in his vibrant memory. The pill in Elara's pocket seemed to vibrate with a dangerous secret. As soon as Gustavo was distracted again by the market figures, she excused herself, claiming she had an important phone call to make, and ascended the stairs with her usual grace. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble, leading her directly to her private office, a sanctuary of luxury and privacy. Closing the door behind her, Elara let her false smile drop, revealing an expression of cold determination. Her eyes, once filled with affectionate warmth, now reflected ruthless ambition. She walked to a small ebony desk where a delicate blue and gold ceramic pot rested, a gift from Gustavo from a trip to Asia, which she used to store paper clips. No one would ever suspect. With a quick, almost ritualistic movement, she took the heart pill from her pocket and dropped it into the pot. The soft click of the pill hitting the ceramic bottom was almost inaudible, but to Ilara, it was the melody of her progress. She looked at the pot, a gleam of triumph in her eyes. "Hide the pot," she whispered to herself, her voice low and husky, like a secret shared only with the silence of the room. "No one will see. No one will know." Little did she know that, in the living room, Loro the parrot had caught the peculiar intonation of Ilara's voice, the subtle shift in her tone when she thought she was alone. The bird, with its keen hearing and innate ability to mimic, filed away every sound, every inflection in its prodigious memory. In the days that followed, Mr. Ricardo's health began to show more evident signs of decline. The absence of vital medication, though subtle at first, was beginning to take its toll. One afternoon, while Ilara was helping him descend the stairs to the garden, the old man felt a sudden dizziness. His knees buckled, and he would have fallen had Ilara not caught him with calculated swiftness. "Oh my God, Mr. Ricardo, are you all right?" Ilara exclaimed, her voice filled with false concern as she gently supported him. "What happened?" Mr. Ricardo blinked, disoriented. I don't know, my dear. A dizzy spell, I think. I think I need to sit down." Ilara led him to a garden bench where he sat, his brow furrowed. "It must be the heat, my dear father-in-law. Or perhaps you didn't eat enough lunch." She rushed to fetch a glass of water, returning with an expression of distress. "I'll call Gustavo. He'll be so worried." Gustavo arrived home earlier than usual, the news of his father's unwellness pulling him from an important meeting. He found Mr. Ricardo, pale but somewhat recovered, sitting in the living room armchair with Ilara by his side, holding his hand affectionately. "Father, what happened? Ilara told me you weren't feeling well." Gustavo knelt beside the armchair, his face etched with genuine concern. "It was just a dizzy spell, my son," Mr. Ricardo replied, his voice a little weak. "Your wife took very good care of me. She's an angel." Ilara smiled at Gustavo, a smile that conveyed both dedication and weariness. "He's a little frail, my love. I think it's his age, you know, and perhaps the stress of being alone so much. I suggested he spend more time in the garden, getting some sun, but he insists on reading." Gustavo sighed, stroking his father's thinning hair. "Father, you need to take care of yourself. Ilara is right. And you, my love, I don't know what I'd do without you. You're the rock of this house." He turned to Ilara, his eyes filled with gratitude and unwavering trust. "I'll call Dr. Almeida tomorrow, just to be sure everything's all right. But I'm sure it's just his age." Ilara nodded, an almost imperceptible gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "It's the best thing to do, my dear. But don't worry, I'll take care of him." As Gustavo stood to go to his office, Loro, from his gilded cage, let out a chirp. Then, with surprising clarity, the parrot repeated, perfectly mimicking Ilara's whispering voice, "Hide the pot!" Ilara froze. Her heart leaped. She turned her head abruptly to the cage, her eyes narrowed in a mix of shock and contained fury. Loro tilted his head, blinking his bright eyes, as if he knew exactly what he had said. Gustavo, engrossed in his thoughts about his father, paid no attention to the bird's chirp, which he considered just another one of its eccentricities, but Ilara felt a chilling shiver run down her spine. The small secret of the blue and gold ceramic pot was not as safe as she had imagined. Ilara froze, Her heart leaped, a dull thud that echoed in her ears, muffling the ambient sound. Luro tilted his head, blinking his bright eyes, as if he knew exactly what he had said, or rather mimicked, that little feathered monster. Gustavo, engrossed in his thoughts about his father and the call to Dr. Almeida, paid no attention to the bird's chirp. To him, it was just Luro being Luro, another one of his vocal eccentricities. "What is it, my love?" he asked, without even looking at Ilara, who was still paralyzed, her eyes fixed on the cage. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, yes, of course," Ilara managed to reply, her voice a little higher pitched than usual. She forced a smile, turning to Gustavo, who was already heading to his office. "Just Luro. He's a bit agitated today." Gustavo nodded, already opening the office door. It must be spring. Birds get like that. And then he disappeared, leaving Ilara alone in the room, with the echo of Luro's voice still vibrating in her mind. "Hide the pot!" Ilara felt a chilling shiver run down her spine. How? How could that bird have picked that up? She had whispered it, almost inaudibly, in her private office. No one was there, no one, unless the sound had traveled somehow. But it was impossible. She had been so careful. She approached the cage, her steps slow and calculated. Luro watched her, his black, intelligent eyes. You don't know what you're saying," Ilara whispered, her voice laden with a veiled threat. The parrot merely blinked, then let out a cheerful chirp, as if mocking her. In the following days, Luro's presence became a silent torture for Ilara. Every chirp, every movement of the bird, was a constant reminder of her vulnerability. She began to avoid him, spending less time in the living room, making excuses not to be near the cage. But the phrase, "hide the pot," seemed to haunt her, echoing in her mind even when the bird was silent. Meanwhile, Mr. Ricardo's health continued to subtly but perceptibly deteriorate. Dr. Almeida, after his visit, had attributed the dizziness and increasing fatigue to advanced age and natural heart fragility. He had adjusted some doses, but without the vital pill Ilara was stealing, the medication was insufficient. Gustavo, relieved by the diagnosis that confirmed his own assumptions, thanked Ilara for her tireless dedication. A week later, during dinner, the tension in the mansion was almost palpable, at least for Ilara. Mr. Ricardo sat at the head of the table, pale and with little appetite. Gustavo, beside him, tried to cheer him up with stock market stories, but the old man merely smiled weakly. Ilara, seated opposite them, barely touched her food, her eyes constantly darting to the adjacent living room where Luro's cage stood. "Father, you need to eat more," Gustavo said with genuine concern. "Dr. Almeida said nutrition is crucial." "I'm not hungry, my son," Mr. Ricardo replied, his voice weak. "I think I'll retire early." Ilara felt a mix of satisfaction and nervousness. The plan was working, but the risk posed by Luro was growing. At that exact moment, as if triggered by an invisible signal, Luro let out a loud chirp. And then, with even more frightening clarity than the first time, he repeated, mimicking Ilara's whispering conspiratorial voice, "Hide the pot, no one will see." This time, Gustavo heard. He stopped cutting his meat, his fork suspended in midair. His eyes, previously fixed on his father, slowly turned to the living room, to the gilded cage. The phrase was strange, the intonation peculiar. He frowned. Ilara felt her blood run cold. Her heart pounded, and she felt a cold sweat trickle down her back. She looked at Gustavo, who was now staring at her with an expression of confusion. "What was that?" Gustavo asked, his voice low, but with a hint of curiosity. "What did Luro say?" Ilara swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. "Oh, Gustavo, it's just Luro. You know how he is. He picks up any phrase he hears and repeats it. He must have heard some television program or something." She forced a laugh, which sounded hollow and strained. "He's a silly parrot." Gustavo, however, did not smile. He continued to look at the cage, and then at Ilara, a shadow of doubt beginning to form in his eyes. The phrase, "hide the pot," and the imitation of Ilara's voice were strangely specific. The parrot blinked again, as if challenging the silence that had settled in the dining room. The small secret of the blue and gold ceramic pot was no longer so safe, and Ilara's facade of perfection began to crack under the weight of a pair of curious, feathered eyes. Gustavo continued to stare at Ilara, the confusion on his face deepening. Her forced laugh sounded like a cracked bell in the silence that followed. "A silly parrot," he repeated, his voice tinged with soft disbelief. "But the voice. It was your voice, Ilara. And the phrase, 'hide the pot, no one will see.' It's so specific." He looked at his father, who seemed oblivious to the tension, his mind already preparing for rest. "Father, did you hear Luro?" Mr. Ricardo blinked, a little sleepy. "Luro. Oh yes, always chattering. What did he say this time?" "Good morning, Grandpa." He tried to smile, but his fatigue was evident. "I think I'll retire now. Good night, my children." Ilara felt a momentary relief as Mr. Ricardo rose with difficulty, leaning on his cane. She hurried to help him, the image of the perfect daughter-in-law once again on display. "Let me accompany you, my dear father-in-law. You need a good rest." She cast a quick, icy glance at Luro's cage as she passed, a silent promise of retribution. Gustavo watched the two walk away, but his eyes soon returned to Luro. The bird, as if sensing the attention, let out a chirp and shook its head. Gustavo stood and walked to the cage, observing the parrot with new curiosity. "Hide the pot," he murmured to himself. "Where did you get that from, Luro?" The bird merely stared at him, blinking. When Ilara returned, the dining room seemed even more silent and heavy. She sat down, trying to appear calm, but her hands trembled slightly beneath the table. "He's already in bed. I think the fatigue is catching up to him." Gustavo didn't respond immediately. He was engrossed in his thoughts, the parrot's phrase hammering in his mind. "Ilara," he began, his voice serious. "Are you sure you haven't heard that phrase somewhere? Or that you haven't said it? The voice was identical to yours." "Gustavo, please!" Ilara tried to sound exasperated, but there was a thinly veiled tone of panic. "It's a parrot! They mimic! It must have been some movie, some soap opera I was watching in the living room. You know how they repeat everything out of context." She gestured, trying to appear natural. "There's no pot to hide, my love." "What nonsense!" Gustavo looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes scrutinizing. He wanted to believe her, wanted to shake off the strange feeling of discomfort that Luro's words had planted. Ilara was his wife, the woman he loved and blindly trusted. She cared for his father with a dedication he had never seen. But the voice, the intonation, it was undeniably hers, and the phrase was so peculiar. "Perhaps you're right," he said finally, but his tone lacked full conviction. "But it's strange, isn't it? Of all things to repeat." He shook his head, trying to dismiss the doubt. "Well, let's forget it. I'm worried about father. He's getting weaker and weaker." Ilara felt temporary relief, but she knew the seed of doubt had been planted. Luro had become a real threat. That night, she barely slept, her mind churning with plans to silence the bird. In the following days, Ilara avoided the living room whenever possible. When Gustavo was home, she forced proximity with Luro, stroking the cage and speaking to the bird in a sweet, false tone, hoping he would pick up new phrases. But Luro seemed to have fixed the phrase, "hide the pot," in his repertoire. Mr. Ricardo's health continued to decline. He spent most of his time in his room reading or napping. Gustavo, increasingly worried, called Dr. Almeida frequently, who reiterated that it was age and natural fragility. One afternoon, Gustavo was in his office reviewing some documents when he heard a noise coming from the living room. He stood up to investigate and found Ilara in front of Luro's cage, speaking to the bird in a low, threatening tone. "You'll stop that, you stupid bird," she hissed, her teeth clenched. "If you repeat that phrase again, I swear I'll—" Luro, as if defying her, let out a loud chirp and, in Ilara's voice, repeated, "Hide the pot! No one will see! Hide the pot!" Gustavo froze in the office doorway. He watched Ilara turn abruptly, her face contorted in a fury he had never seen before. She hadn't noticed him. Her eyes were fixed on the bird, filled with visceral hatred. "Ilara!" Gustavo called, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. She jumped, turning to him, shock and terror etched on her face. Her fury transformed into a mask of panic. Gustavo walked slowly towards her, his eyes fixed on hers. The unwavering trust he felt for his wife had shattered. The scene he had just witnessed, her fury, the parrot's words, everything clicked into place in a terrible way. "What were you doing?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "And what does 'hide the pot' mean? And why are you so angry with Luro for repeating it?" Ilara tried to compose herself, but the words wouldn't come. Her face was pale, and she felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The facade of perfection had finally crumbled, exposed by a pair of feathered eyes and an innocent voice. Gustavo, the man who loved and blindly trusted her, now looked at her with a shadow of suspicion that chilled her soul. The game had begun. Gustavo stared at her, his voice low and dangerous, but his eyes were a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, betrayal, a pain that Ilara felt pierce her own soul. The mask of panic on her face was real, not an act. The ground beneath her feet truly seemed to vanish. "Ilara, what were you doing? And what does 'hide the pot' mean? And why are you so angry with Luro for repeating it?" With each question, Gustavo took a step forward, closing the distance between them, the intensity of his gaze almost physical. Ilara swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her mind raced, desperate for a plausible excuse. "Gustavo, my love, you misunderstood everything." She tried to force a smile, but her lips trembled. I was just playing with him. You know how stubborn he is with certain phrases. I was trying to make him stop repeating that because it's annoying and meaningless." "Playing?" Gustavo repeated, incredulity sharp in his voice. "With that fury on your face. You were hissing at him, Ilara. And what's so annoying about a phrase he picked up from some TV show, as you said? Why would that make you so furious as to threaten him?" Luro, as if understanding the unfolding drama, let out another chirp, and then, in Ilara's voice, repeated, "Hide the pot, no one will see." Gustavo's gaze flickered to the bird, then back to Ilara, doubt solidifying into certainty in his eyes. The voice. "It's your voice, Ilara. There's no denying it. And the phrase, 'hide the pot, no one will see.' That's not something you hear just anywhere. It's an instruction, an order." He shook his head slowly. "What are you hiding, Ilara?" Ilara's legs buckled. She felt a chill run down her spine. The truth was so close to being revealed that she could almost feel it in the air. She needed to reverse the situation, deflect attention. I'm not hiding anything, Gustavo. What nonsense! What are you accusing me of? Of being cruel to a parrot? He's a noisy, annoying bird sometimes. I just lost my patience, that's all." She tried to raise her voice to sound offended, but panic betrayed her. And the pot must be something he heard from a neighbor or a gardener talking about flower pots. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill because of a parrot." Gustavo didn't move. His eyes, once filled with love and trust, were now cold and distant. "No, Ilara, I'm not making a storm. I'm seeing something I cannot ignore. The way you reacted, your fury, the specificity of the phrase, and my father's health." He paused, and the mention of Mr. Ricardo brought a new level of seriousness to his voice. He's getting weaker and weaker, and the doctors say it's his age. But what if it's not? What if there's something more? Ilara's heart plummeted. He was connecting the dots. Gustavo, no, you can't be thinking. I care for your father so tenderly. I'm the perfect daughter-in-law. You know that. I love him as if he were my own father. The words tumbled out desperately, an attempt to use the facade she had so painstakingly built. The perfect daughter-in-law, Gustavo murmured, his voice laced with bitter irony. The perfect daughter-in-law doesn't threaten a bird for repeating a phrase. The perfect daughter-in-law doesn't have a pot to hide, and the perfect daughter-in-law doesn't lie to me, Ilara. He turned, walking towards the coffee table, where a stack of magazines lay. His eyes swept the room, as if searching for something. Ilara watched his every move, terror growing within her. He wasn't just suspicious, he was investigating. I'm going to find out what's going on here, Ilara, Gustavo said without looking at her. His voice was calm now, but the calm was more terrifying than any shout. And if what I discover has anything to do with my father's health, you will regret the day you were born. Ilara felt a cold shiver. The threat was veiled, but its weight was overwhelming. The game had changed. She was no longer just hiding a secret. She was fighting for her life, for her position, for everything she had built. And Luro, the small green bird, was the pivot of her impending ruin. She needed to act, and fast. Time was running out. Gustavo ignored the parrot's repetition, his blue eyes fixed on Ilara, piercing and filled with contained pain. I'll start with the obvious. Where is my father's medication? Ilara's heart leaped, beating erratically in her chest. She hadn't expected him to be so direct, so incisive. The medication? It's on his bedside table, as always. I put it there every night. She tried to sound casual, but her voice was a little too high, and her nervousness was palpable. Gustavo didn't reply. He simply turned and walked towards the staircase, ascending the steps 2 at a time, with chilling determination, without even looking back. Ilara stood frozen, watching him disappear upstairs, feeling a cold terror spread throughout her body. He was going to Mr. Ricardo's room. He was going to find out. She needed to think, needed a plan. Where had she hidden the pot of medication she didn't want him to take? Where did she keep the ones she didn't give him, the ones that should have been replenishing the stock? Her mind spun in a whirlwind of panic. At the back of the guest bathroom cabinet, behind old forgotten towels, a place no one used, a perfect refuge for her secret. But Gustavo could look anywhere now. She ran to the living room, her eyes fixed on Luro's cage. The bird watched her with its small, black, intelligent eyes, as if it knew everything, as if it were enjoying her agony. "You'll pay for this, you filthy creature," she hissed, but without approaching. She couldn't risk Gustavo hearing her again, couldn't give him more ammunition. She needed to get rid of Luro. She couldn't kill him. It would be too obvious, too risky. But she could. She could take him far away, to the country house perhaps, where he would be isolated, or donate him to someone distant, someone who wouldn't ask questions. Yes, that was the immediate solution, the only way to silence the feathered witness. While Ilara was devising her desperate plan for the parrot, Gustavo was already in his father's room. Mr. Ricardo was lying in bed, reading a book, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He looked frail, his skin thin and pale, his eyes weary. "Father, how are you?" Gustavo asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, his voice softened by genuine concern. Mr. Ricardo sighed. "Tired, my son. Always tired. And my memory. My memory betrays me. I don't know where I put my reading glasses." He pointed to the glasses already on his nose, a weak, confused smile on his lips. Gustavo felt a pang in his chest. It was worse than he thought. He stood and went to the bedside table. There was a small pill bottle, almost empty. "Father, did you take your medication today?" "Oh, yes. Ilara gave them to me this morning. She's so thoughtful. Isn't she, my son? A golden daughter-in-law." Mr. Ricardo smiled weakly, the innocence on his face piercing Gustavo's heart. Gustavo picked up the bottle. There was only 1 or 2 pills left. He remembered seeing a full bottle just a few days ago. He opened the bedside table drawer. Empty. He opened the bottom drawer. Empty. Where were the other bottles? Dr. Almeida had prescribed several medications, not just one. He remembered the phrase, "Hide the pot." His gaze swept the room, now with a new intensity, looking for anything out of place. He opened the closet, looked behind the books on the shelf. Nothing. He went to the adjoining bathroom. He opened the medicine cabinet. Empty, except for a few personal hygiene items. Anger began to bubble within him, mixed with a growing sense of dread. Ilara had said the medication was on the bedside table, but they weren't all there. Where were the others? He left his father's room, his expression grim, his jaw clenched. Ilara was at the foot of the stairs, trying to appear calm, but her eyes betrayed the nervousness, the fear that consumed her. "Where is my father's other medication, Ilara?" Gustavo asked, his voice low but laden with a contained fury that threatened to explode at any moment. "The ones Dr. Almeida prescribed a week ago? They're not on his bedside table. They're not in his bathroom. Where are they?" Ilara felt her blood run cold. He had looked. He knew something was wrong. She was cornered, with no way out. I kept them in a safer place, my love, so father wouldn't confuse them. You know how forgetful he's been." She attempted a forced smile, a last desperate attempt at manipulation. "They're in the guest bathroom cabinet downstairs. I was going to get them for his evening dose." Gustavo looked at her, incredulity and fury mixing in his eyes, turning them a stormy blue. "In the guest bathroom? Why on earth would you keep them there? And why didn't you tell me?" He didn't wait for an answer. He descended the last steps and walked quickly towards the guest bathroom, his strides firm and determined. Ilara felt despair wash over her, an intense cold in her stomach. He was going straight for the pot, for the irrefutable proof of her cruelty. She had to stop him, or all would be lost. She ran after him, her mind in a whirlwind of chaotic thoughts. "Gustavo, wait, I can explain." But Gustavo was already opening the bathroom door. Time truly was running out, and for Ilara, it was already over. He flung open the guest bathroom door with an impetus that made the wood creak. Ilara, panting, stopped at the threshold, watching him with wide eyes. The bathroom was small, rarely used, and the air there felt denser, laden with a truth about to be unearthed. Gustavo wasted no time. He went straight for the built-in cabinet above the toilet, the same one Ilara had mentioned. With a sharp pull, he opened the doors. Inside, piles of face and bath towels, some faded and forgotten. He began to rummage, tossing the towels aside with growing impatience. Ilara felt her heart pound in her throat. "Gustavo, please, don't be so rough. I was just trying to organize things for father. He's so forgetful, and I didn't want him to take the wrong medication." The words tumbled out in a rush, desperate but empty. Gustavo ignored her. His fingers fumbled at the back of the cabinet, behind a stack of blue bath towels no one had used for years. And then he felt it, a rigid, cylindrical object. He pulled it out. It was a transparent plastic bag, and inside it several bottles of medication. Full bottles, bottles with his father's name, Mr. Ricardo, and Dr. Almeida's instructions. Pills for memory, for blood pressure, for his heart, all there, intact, untouched. The pot Ilara had hidden. The silence that followed was deafening. Gustavo held the plastic bag, the bottles clinking softly, irrefutable proof of a cruel betrayal. His eyes, once stormy, were now frozen in an icy blue, fixed on Ilara. The pain and fury were so intense they seemed to consume the air around them. "Explain, Ilara." Gustavo's voice was a dangerous whisper, more terrifying than any shout. He held up the plastic bag, letting the bottles be seen. "Are you going to explain this? Are you going to explain why my father's medication, the ones that would keep him alive and lucid, are hidden here like trash, while he wastes away upstairs?" Ilara recoiled a step, her face pale. "No, it's not what you think, Gustavo. I was keeping them for his evening dose. I was going to take them to him. I just didn't want him to see them and get confused." "Confused?" Gustavo took a step forward, his voice rising, laden with repulsion. "He's confused because you're making him confused. He's weak because you're weakening him. You're killing him, Ilara, slowly, deliberately." Suddenly, from downstairs, Luro's shrill voice echoed from the living room. "Hide the pot. No one will see. Hide the pot." The repetition of the phrase at that moment was like a sentence, a hammer striking the truth. Gustavo looked at the bag in his hands, then at Ilara, and the penny dropped with a brutal thud. The parrot wasn't just repeating a random phrase. He was repeating Ilara's words, the order she gave herself as she committed her cruelty. You did this," Gustavo stammered, his voice choked with disbelief and pain. "You were hiding my father's medication. You were waiting for him to die." Ilara shook her head frantically. "No, I would never do that. I love you, Gustavo. I love your father. It's all a misunderstanding, I swear." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of panic, not remorse. "Don't come at me with your lies and your love now, Ilara." Gustavo snarled, his patience exhausted. He threw the bag of medication to the floor, the bottles rolling and clinking. "I was blinded by your facade, by your manipulation. But now I see the cruel and ambitious woman you truly are." He stepped closer to her, his gaze so intense that Ilara felt a primal fear. "You are not the perfect daughter-in-law. You are a monster. And my father almost paid with his life for this." Ilara tried to touch his arm, but Gustavo recoiled in disgust. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. I don't know who you are, but I know you're not the woman I married." "Gustavo, please listen to me," she pleaded, despair taking over. "I can explain. I can fix this." "Fix it?" he scoffed, a humorless laugh, full of bitterness. "There's no fixing this, Ilara. There's no forgiveness. You crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, and now you will pay for every day of suffering my father endured." He turned, walking out of the bathroom, leaving Ilara alone amidst the forgotten towels and scattered medication on the floor. His voice, now cold and distant, echoed down the hallway. "Get out of my house, Ilara, now, and don't you dare come back." Ilara stood there paralyzed, the sound of Gustavo's words piercing her soul. Her perfect life, her meticulously constructed facade, had crumbled in an instant, reduced to dust. The game was over, and she had lost everything. The silence of the bathroom was broken only by the distant echo of Luro's voice, which seemed to mock her. "Hide the pot. No one will see." Ilara remained motionless, her body rigid, the sound of Gustavo's words still reverberating in her ears like distant thunder. "Now, and don't you dare come back." The bathroom door, which Gustavo had left ajar, seemed like a portal to an abyss. Hot tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of fury and despair. Fury at being discovered, despair at having lost everything. The plan, so meticulously orchestrated, undone by a parrot and a bag of pills. She looked at the bottles scattered on the floor, some still rolling slowly, like dice cast in a game she had lost. The pot. That damned pot. She knelt, her hands trembling, and began to gather the bottles, as if by putting them away again. She could somehow reverse time, erase the truth that had just been revealed, but it was useless. The image of Gustavo's face, distorted by repulsion, was etched in her mind. From the hallway, Gustavo's voice sounded again, louder and firmer. "Ilara, I won't repeat myself. Get out, now!" Panic hit her with full force. She couldn't just leave. Not like this. Her entire life was here, her position, her future. She stood, the medication bottles clutched to her chest, and ran out of the bathroom. Gustavo was at the end of the hallway, his back to her, speaking on the phone. "Yes, I need a taxi. For now, and yes, call Dr. Almeida. Tell him it's urgent. It's about my father." Ilara felt a chill. He was calling the doctor. He was acting. There was no turning back. "Gustavo!" she cried. Her voice choked. He turned slowly, the phone still to his ear, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her recoil. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my house. I am your wife." Gustavo hung up the phone, putting it in his pocket. "You were my wife. You are no longer, and this house was never truly yours. You only wanted what it represented." He took a step forward, and Ilara recoiled another. "You have 10 minutes. Take what's essential. If you don't leave willingly, I'll call security to drag you out." The threat was real. Ilara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "You can't do this. I have rights. You can't just throw me out." "Rights?" Gustavo laughed humorlessly. "You talk about rights after trying to kill my father, after manipulating me, blinding me with your lies. You have no right to anything here, Ilara, nothing but a quick exit before I lose control completely." His voice was a low growl, but laden with a contained violence that terrified her. "And what will you tell everyone? Society, that your wife is a potential murderer. You'll destroy your own reputation." Ilara tried to play her last card, the scandal card. Gustavo smiled coldly. "I will tell the truth, and if that tarnishes my reputation, so be it. At least I will have a clear conscience, and my father alive." He pointed to the stairs. "Your room. 5 minutes." Ilara hated him at that moment, hated his righteousness, his inflexibility, but fear was greater. She knew he wasn't bluffing. With a last hateful glare, she ran up the stairs, her tears now of rage and humiliation. Gustavo watched her ascend, his jaw clenched. As soon as she disappeared upstairs, he turned and went to the living room. Luro was perched on his stand, shaking his head. "Hide the pot. No one will see. Hide the pot." Gustavo looked at the parrot, a pang of gratitude mixed with pain. That animal, the only witness, the only voice of truth. He approached the cage. "Thank you, Luro," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You saved my father." He heard the sound of hurried footsteps upstairs, followed by the dragging of a suitcase. Ilara was preparing to leave. He needed to ensure she actually went, and then he needed to care for his father. Guilt gnawed at him. How could he have been so blind? How could he have allowed this to happen? Ilara descended the stairs, dragging a wheeled suitcase. Her face swollen and red, but her eyes hardened. She had no time for anything else, just the essentials as Gustavo had ordered. She stopped on the last step, looking at him with a mix of defiance and defeat. "You'll regret this, Gustavo," she spat, her voice laden with venom. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing, Ilara," he replied, his voice calm but cold as ice. "I'm getting rid of a cancer that was corroding my family, and I'm saving my father's life." He opened the mansion's main door. "Your taxi should be arriving." Ilara looked at the open door, at the night that awaited her. Her life of luxury, of power, of control, crumbled before her eyes. She had nowhere to go, no plan B, only humiliation and emptiness. With a last hateful glance at Gustavo, she dragged her suitcase out, disappearing into the darkness. Gustavo watched until the taxi drove away, taking with it the woman he thought he knew. He closed the door, the silence of the house now heavy, but somehow cleaner. He still had much to do, much to process. But the first and hardest part was over. Ilara was gone, And now he needed to focus on his father. Ilara was gone. Gustavo leaned against the closed door, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. Anger still simmered in his veins, but a deep exhaustion and a bitter relief began to settle in. Ilara was gone. The woman he loved, the woman who deceived him, the woman who almost killed his father. The air in the house felt lighter, less dense, as if an invisible poison had finally been removed. But relief was quickly replaced by an overwhelming wave of guilt. So naive? He had trusted her blindly, ignoring the signs, the subtle changes in his father, the image of his weak, confused father, wasting away in his room, pierced his heart. He took a deep breath and ascended the stairs, 2 steps at a time, urgency propelling him. Upon reaching the upper floor, the silence was almost deafening. He opened his father's bedroom door carefully. Mr. Ricardo was lying in bed, pale, his breathing shallow and irregular. His eyes were closed and an expression of deep weariness marked his face. Gustavo approached the bed, his heart tight. He knelt beside his father, taking his cold, wrinkled hand. "Father?" he whispered, his voice choked. "Father, it's me, Gustavo. I'm here." Mr. Ricardo slowly opened his eyes, blinking a few times, confusion still present in his gaze. He tried to smile, but it was a painful effort. "Gustavo, my son," he murmured, his voice weak. "Don't exert yourself, Father. The doctor is coming. Everything will be all right now." Gustavo felt a tear roll down his face. He kissed his father's hand, promising himself he would do everything to make up for lost time, for the pain inflicted. While waiting for Dr. Almeida, Gustavo returned to the living room to retrieve the medication he had collected from the bathroom. Luro was there, on his perch, shaking his head. "Hide the pot. No one will see. Hide the pot," he repeated, Ilara's voice echoing in the silence. Gustavo looked at the parrot, a deep and strange gratitude washing over him. That animal, with its innocent repetition, had been the catalyst for the truth. "Thank you, Luro," he said again, this time with more conviction. "You were more loyal than anyone." The doorbell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Dr. Almeida. Gustavo opened the door, his face tense. "Dr. Almeida, thank you for coming so quickly." The doctor, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses and a serious expression, nodded. "Gustavo, what happened?" Your voice on the phone was very distressed. Gustavo quickly led him to his father's room, explaining in a low, hurried voice. It's a long story, doctor, but in short, I discovered that my father's medication was being hidden. He hadn't been taking it regularly, perhaps for weeks." He handed him the bag with the bottles. "They were all here. I found them." Dr. Almeida took the bag, his expression turning grave upon seeing the quantity of medication. He looked at Gustavo, a mix of shock and concern in his eyes. "Hidden? Gustavo, this is very serious. Your father's medication is vital to control his blood pressure and heart condition. Its absence can have severe consequences." They entered the room. Dr. Almeida quickly began to examine Mr. Ricardo, checking his heart rate, blood pressure, and reflexes. Gustavo watched every movement, every expression of the doctor, his heart in his throat. The silence was broken only by the sounds of the equipment and his father's weak breathing. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, Dr. Almeida turned to Gustavo, his expression serious. "He is very weak, Gustavo. His blood pressure is dangerously low and his heart is struggling. It's clear that the lack of medication is the main cause. He is also dehydrated and malnourished, which aggravates the situation." Gustavo felt a lump in his throat. He's going to be okay, doctor." The doctor sighed. "With the right care, yes, there's a good chance of recovery. But it will be a slow and delicate process. He will need immediate intravenous medication to stabilize his blood pressure and hydration. I'll call a nursing team to come here tonight and monitor him closely." We need to reintroduce the medication gradually and observe his reaction. Anything, doctor, whatever it takes. Gustavo's voice was firm, laden with a new determination. For now, let's start with the IV and some blood tests. We need to rule out other complications. And Gustavo, he'll need peace and quiet and someone trustworthy to ensure he takes all his medication without fail. Doctor. Almeida looked at Gustavo with silent understanding. I'll do it myself, doctor, Gustavo promised, looking at his father. I won't leave his side, never again. The night wore on, and the mansion, once a stage of deception, now became an improvised hospital. Gustavo sat beside his father, watching the nurse set up the IV, the soft sound of the heart monitor filling the room. Guilt still gnawed at him, but his father's presence, the chance for atonement, gave him strength. Elara was gone, and with her, the darkness that had infiltrated his home. Now it was time to bring the light back. The hours dragged on, heavy and silent. Gustavo didn't move from the bedside. He watched the nurse's every move, a middle-aged woman named Clara who worked with calm, a professional efficiency. She checked Mr. Ricardo's vital signs, adjusted the IV drip, and made notes on a clipboard. The heart monitor emitted a constant beep, a rhythmic reminder of the fragile life hanging in the balance. Mr. Ricardo remained unconscious, or in a very deep sleep, for most of the night. His breathing, previously shallow, seemed a little more regular with the intravenous hydration. Gustavo held his father's hand, feeling the cold, thin skin, and imagined the weeks, perhaps months, of neglect that had led him to this state. The image of Elara, with her false smile and her hands he thought were caring, now seemed a grotesque mask. The question hammered in his mind, an endless torture. Near dawn, Dr. Almeida returned for another assessment. He carefully examined Mr. Ricardo, listening to his heart and lungs. Gustavo watched, tension tightening his chest. "How is he, doctor?" Gustavo asked, his voice hoarse with fatigue and anxiety. The doctor sighed, removing his stethoscope. "Stable, Gustavo, that's a good sign. His blood pressure has risen a little and the hydration is taking effect. But he is still very weak. Malnutrition is a concern. We need to start feeding him small portions of nutritious liquids as soon as he is more conscious." "Will he wake up?" Gustavo asked, his heart racing. "Yes, I believe so, but it will be a gradual process. He may be confused at first. The priority now is to stabilize his condition and ensure he receives all the medication and nutrients he needs." Dr. Almeida looked at Gustavo with an expression of compassion. "You look exhausted, my dear. Go rest for a bit. Nurse Clara is here and is extremely competent." Gustavo shook his head. "No, doctor, I'm not leaving here, not now." The doctor nodded, understanding. "All right, but try to eat something. You also need your strength to care for him." After Dr. Almeida left, Gustavo allowed himself a moment of weakness. He leaned his head on the edge of the bed, closing his eyes. Guilt was a heavy burden, but the determination to atone for his mistakes was even stronger. He had failed his father, but now, with Elara gone, he had a chance to set things right. Hours later, with the sun high, a slight movement in his father's hand made him lift his head. Mr. Ricardo opened his eyes, blinking slowly. His eyes, previously unfocused, now seemed a little more present. He looked at Gustavo, and a small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on his pale lips. "Gustavo," he murmured, his voice a weak whisper. "Father." "I'm here," Gustavo replied, tears welling in his eyes. He squeezed his father's hand gently. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Nurse Clara approached, checking Mr. Ricardo's vital signs. "That's great, Mr. Gustavo. A good sign. Now let's try a little water, very slowly." Gustavo watched as the nurse helped his father take a few sips of water. Every small sip was a victory. a step in the long journey of recovery. The mansion was still silent, but now it was a silence of healing and hope, no longer of deception. Later, while the nurse prepared a small liquid meal, Gustavo went down to the living room to stretch his legs. Luro was on his perch, shaking his head. "Hide the pot. No one will see. Hide the pot," the parrot repeated, Ilara's voice still echoing, but now without the power to deceive. Gustavo looked at the bird, a lump in his throat. "You were the only one who saw, weren't you, Luro?" he whispered. "The only one who warned me." His gratitude for the parrot was immense, but the pain of the truth was a constant reminder of his own blindness. He knew that his father's recovery would be a long and arduous road, and that his own healing from Ilara's betrayal would be equally difficult. But for the first time in a long time, Gustavo felt a clarity. He was in control of his home again, and he would do everything to protect his father and rebuild the life Ilara had tried to destroy. The light was returning slowly but surely. Back in the room, Gustavo sat down beside his father again. Mr. Ricardo, his eyes more open, looked at him with an expression that seemed to want to convey something deeper. "Ilara, is she all right?" he asked, his voice still weak, but with a touch of concern. Gustavo hesitated. How to explain the brutal truth without further shaking his father's fragile health? She's gone, father. Don't worry about that now. The important thing is for you to recover. I'm here to take care of you." He squeezed his father's hand again, trying to convey the full sincerity of his words. Mr. Ricardo closed his eyes for a moment, as if processing the information. A slight tremor ran through his body. I feel so weak, Gustavo. So lost." "I know, father, but that will change. We will take care of you. Nurse Clara is here, and Dr. Almeida is monitoring everything closely. You will be strong again." Gustavo felt a pang of anger thinking about how Ilara had exploited this vulnerability. He couldn't allow it to happen again. While the nurse prepared the first liquid meal, a nutritious, warm broth, Gustavo began to plan. He needed more than a temporary nurse. He needed a support team, reinforced security in the house, a complete review of his father's finances and will. Ilara's betrayal was not just emotional, it was a real threat to his father's safety and well-being. He would conduct an audit of everything without exception. The mansion, once a refuge, had become a silent battlefield. Now he would transform it into a fortress of care and protection. Watching the nurse help Mr. Ricardo take the first sip of broth, Gustavo felt a mix of relief and iron determination. The recovery would be long, full of challenges, but he was ready. The darkness had been expelled, and now, with every small sip, with every stronger heartbeat, the light was not just returning, it was being actively rebuilt brick by his own hands. Gustavo wasted no time. While Nurse Clara cared for his father, he retreated to his office, phone in hand. The first call was to Dr. Almeida to discuss the need for a 24-hour nursing team. "Doctor, I want the best. Someone who can live here if necessary, who has experience with delicate cases like my father's." The doctor, pleased with Gustavo's proactivity, promised to send recommendations for highly qualified professionals. Next, Gustavo called his lawyer. "I need a complete audit of all my father's finances, assets, and a review of his will. And I want you to investigate Ilara, her every step in recent years, every transaction, leave no stone unturned." The lawyer's voice, initially surprised, became grave upon hearing the urgency and seriousness in Gustavo's tone. "Understood, Mr. Almeida. I'll start immediately." With each call, a weight seemed to lift from Gustavo's shoulders, replaced by a sense of control and purpose. He had been a passive spectator for too long, allowing Ilara's manipulation to corrode his family. Now, he would be the guardian. Back in his father's room, Mr. Ricardo seemed a little more alert. Nurse Clara was changing the IV drip, and the heart monitor maintained its steady rhythm. Gustavo sat down again, taking his father's hand. "Father, I spoke with Dr. Almeida. We're going to have a team of nurses here, day and night, to care for you. You won't be alone for a second." Mr. Ricardo gently squeezed Gustavo's hand. "Nurses, for me." His eyes, though clearer, still carried a shadow of confusion. "I'm not that bad, am I?" The denial was a defense mechanism, but also a sign of the depth of the neglect. "You will be fine, Father, but we need to make sure you recover completely. And for that you need a lot of attention and care." He avoided mentioning the cause of the weakness, knowing that the truth about Ilara could be devastating for his father at that moment. "And Ilara?" Mr. Ricardo asked again, his voice a little stronger but still laden with genuine concern. Isn't she coming to visit me?" Gustavo took a deep breath. "Father, Ilara isn't here anymore. She had to leave. Don't worry about her. The important thing now is you. I'm here, and I will take care of you." He tried to keep his voice steady, but the pain of betrayal was palpable. It was difficult to hide the truth, but it was crucial to protect his father. Mr. Ricardo seemed to absorb the information, a wrinkle of sadness and perhaps a little incomprehension crossing his face. "Was it because of me?" he whispered. "No, Father, not at all. It's not your fault. It never was. Please don't think about that. Just focus on getting strong." Gustavo felt a wave of anger towards Ilara. Even in her absence, she continued to cause pain. In the days that followed, the mansion transformed. A new team of nurses, led by an experienced and gentle woman named Sophia, took over Mr. Ricardo's care. They worked in shifts, ensuring he was never unattended. Medication was reintroduced cautiously, nutritious liquid feeding became regular, and small physiotherapy exercises began, aiming to restore lost muscle strength. Gustavo became his father's shadow. He worked from the office next to the room, participated in all meetings with doctors and nurses, and spent hours talking with Mr. Ricardo, reading to him, and simply being present. Each day, his father showed small improvements. His voice grew a little stronger, his eyes more focused, and he could sit up in bed for longer periods. Still, the recovery was slow. Mr. Ricardo frequently felt confused, and the memory of recent months was hazy, a blessing and a curse. He asked about Ilara occasionally, and Gustavo always responded with the same caution, deflecting the subject and reinforcing his own commitment. Meanwhile, Gustavo's lawyer worked tirelessly. The first discoveries were disturbing. Ilara had made questionable financial movements, transferring small amounts to offshore accounts and subtly but significantly altering property documents. Gustavo felt a chill down his spine. Ilara's ambition was even deeper than he had imagined. She didn't just want status, she wanted financial control, the inheritance. One afternoon, as Gustavo descended to the living room, Lauro greeted him from his perch. "Hide the pot! No one will see! Hide the pot!" The parrot squawked, Ilara's voice still haunting the air. Gustavo closed his eyes, the image of the disappearing pot of medication, Ilara's voice mocking him in his mind. "You were right, Laura," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You saw everything." Guilt gnawed at him, but his determination was stronger. He had been blind, but now he saw with painful clarity. He returned to his father's room. Mr. Ricardo was sleeping, his breathing more regular, his face a little more relaxed. Gustavo sat beside him, taking his aged hand. "I failed you, Father," he murmured, the words almost inaudible. "I let her do this, but no more. I swear no more." The fortress of care and protection was erected, but now Gustavo realized that the battle was not just for his father's physical recovery. It was a war to dismantle the web of lies and fraud Ilara had woven to protect his family's legacy and dignity. He called Dr. Carvalho again. "I want you to prepare everything. Every piece of evidence, every document. I want her to pay for every cent, for every day of suffering she caused my father, and I want her to be held criminally responsible, without mercy." The lawyer's voice, previously cautious, now sounded with new gravity. "Understood, Mr. Almeida. We will begin building the case immediately. It will be a difficult battle, but we have the evidence." Gustavo knew it would be, but for the first time in a long time, he felt no fear. He felt a cold fury and an unwavering resolve. The light was returning, not just for his father, but for justice. And he would be the instrument of that light, no matter the cost. The months that followed were a marathon of battles, both in court and in Mr. Ricardo's room. Dr. Carvalho and his team worked tirelessly, unraveling Ilara's complex web of fraud. The evidence was overwhelming: forged documents, bank transfers to secret accounts, incriminating emails, and testimonies from employees who, under anonymity, revealed Ilara's manipulative conduct. Ilara, who had disappeared after Gustavo's departure, was finally located in a small Central American country, living under a false name. Extradition was a long and tortuous process, but Gustavo's determination was unwavering. He wanted justice, not just for his father, but for his mother's memory and for the integrity of his family. In court, Ilara maintained a cold and defiant posture, denying all accusations and trying to blame Gustavo and even Mr. Ricardo for her own unhappiness and pressures. But her facade of innocence crumbled before the mountain of evidence. Clara's testimony, the nurse who had noticed the irregularities, was crucial, as was the expert analysis that confirmed the tampering with the medication. The verdict came after weeks of intense debates. Ilara was found guilty of fraud, attempted extortion, and gross negligence, with the aggravating factor of elder abuse. The sentence was severe, reflecting the calculated cruelty of her actions. She was sentenced to a long prison term and ordered to restitute all assets she had attempted to divert. The mansion, finally, was free of her shadow. While justice ran its course, Mr. Ricardo continued his recovery. Gustavo's constant presence and the dedication of the nursing team, especially Sophia, worked miracles. He had regained much of his physical strength, could walk with support, and his mind was clearer, although there were still gaps from the months of his illness. Gustavo, in a moment of deep reflection, decided that his father didn't need to know the full extent of Ilara's